One of our favorite stories to tell at Ignite is the story of Kimberley Homes. Through some pretty tough economic times, you guys have been able to find a level of success that, frankly, your competitors haven't really been able to find. And I think we can both say that that level of success and that resiliency is no accident. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. In terms of, I guess if I could put my finger on anything, it all does come down to leadership and about knowing what you got to get right. And in our case, we certainly we're not immune to adversity. And I think one of the biggest things that a great organization needs to do and great leaders need to do is overcome adversity. And so, in terms of finding our way in some of these tougher times that we've been in, I guess really even pre-pandemic and really the last 5 years, you got to really focus on what you got to get right and know what you can't get wrong, and know what you're really good at and be even better at what you're not good at. So certainly we've learned our lessons, but in going through those lessons and overcoming those adversities, I think that's where we found our strength and where we found um, our niche that's allowed us to be successful over the last number of years.
Yeah, I like the comment there that it's an incremental process and it doesn't happen overnight. And reading between the lines, you can't do it all on your own. Right? Can you talk a little bit about the value that your team adds to this construct of resiliency?
Yeah, I mean, I've always believed that if you surround yourself with great people, you're going to find a way to success. And uh, I've ta- I believe the importance of hiring attitude over aptitude, hiring people that are optimistic versus pessimistic, and people that are like deeply committed to their role and deeply passionate about the work that they're doing. And lacking experience is okay as long as they know they lack experience and they got to learn. So to me, the team is everything. And when I go back 4, 5, 6 years, I remember the early stages working with your organization. A lot of it wasn't that I didn't have the right people or great people, but I didn't necessarily have the right people or the great people doing
Mm.
the right things where their talents best suited them. And so being able to reposition people, for example, that weren't strategists into roles that better suited them, where they could better enhance the organization through where their talents were, and having younger leaders emerge that were highly focused on strategy and highly focused on culture. You start to get the right people doing the right things, and all of a sudden things start to click.
Yeah. Before we jump into a playback there, because there's a lot of good lessons to unpack, one of the analogies that we've used with Kimberly Homes and something that you've helped us crystallize here is the analogy of a ship in a storm. And I know that you know what I'm talking about. Can you give me a little bit more detail about that analogy and how it relates to this construct of team and resiliency?
Well, sure. I mean, I guess there's a couple of things to unpack there as well. I guess first of all, a ship in a storm in troubled waters, needs to have a captain that sees clearly where the path is. And whether it's a lighthouse or whether it's a true north, you pick what it is. But at the end of the day, there needs to be alignment on where you're headed and how you're getting out of the turbulent waters that you're in. And part of that is that great leaders need to simplify the complex. And if you think about that ship in the storm, and you think about, you think about sails tearing and waves coming over the bow of the boat. Some of those waves you got to ignore, and you got to keep your hand on the wheel and keep moving straight. And you got to ignore, in a business context, you got to ignore some of the noise, and you've got to simplify the complex for your team and for your people, and say, does that matter right now? Yes, it's important. Yes, it's a concern, but doesn't matter right now. Is that something we have to get right? And some of the things you will, and some of the things you won't. So leadership is knowing those things you got to get right, and helping your team to simplify, to focus on the things that actually matter.
Absolutely. I mean, let's start to unpack this a little bit. The last thing we want to do is undervalue or downplay the value of having a strong team. But I think your comment there around having a captain who at times like that sits up in the bird's nest almost and has that visionary outlook. It's a central function to maintaining that resiliency, to maintaining that strategic success. because as a business, you have a choice. You have a choice to operate day to day, be reactionary, be a product of your environment, or you can flip the script and say, look, we're going to take control of where we want to go. We're going to take control of how we want to do it. And eventually, our environment is going to become a product of us, not the other way around.
That's
And
right.
it doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen solely thanks to you, and it doesn't happen solely thanks to your team. It doesn't happen solely thanks to strategy. It's a factor of all these pieces at play.
That's right.
In terms of your role as the CEO, one of the things that we know is the role of the CEO is a traditionally lonely role. I'll use that term. You're at the top, and in the analogy of the ship, you're sitting up at the bird's nest there. How do you manage both the loneliness isn't quite the right term, but I think you know where I'm going with this. Like, how do you manage the isolation of the role of the CEO, and how do you maintain that steady composure and vision going forward?
Well, I think there's a couple of things there. I mean, there's obviously strategy that has to exist within your team and your leadership team be cascaded down to your organization. But I think to be a highly functioning CEO, I use the term simplifying the complex. That's not just for others; that's for yourself too. You can't afford, particularly in times of crisis, and let's face it, whether your business has been highly successful through 2020 or whether it was a really tough go for you, at the end of the day, you had to you be very clear on. I've used this line a couple of times on what you've got to get right. You've got to be clear on what you can't get wrong. And you can't afford to have the rest of your team's lives complicated in a time of crisis with all the things that you need to consider. So that comes back to, again, that construct of simplifying the complex. So what I find is that I need to have a strategic roadmap for myself, independent of the business, that is very, I guess, a self check for me on how am I conducting myself. At the end of the day, the culture and the performance of any business is directly linked to the actions and behaviors of the CEO. What you do in a whisper, what you say in a whisper, what your facial posture is in a meeting, the slightest uh, physical response that you have to something that's stressful. All of those things that you think are being done in a whisper, your team can hear in a scream, and you got to be so cognizant of those aspects.
Yeah.
So having a plan for yourself to overcome that is really important. And the other thing that I'll add to that, Jordan, is it is a lonely role as a CEO. There are things that you cannot talk to your partners or shareholders about. There's things that you can't talk to your senior staff about. There's things that you can't bring home and take home to your family. So I would encourage every organizational leader to invest in themselves and to invest in their business, to have a coach and have someone that they can turn to that sits outside, that can be a sounding board. I think it's a really important thing.
So a couple of things that I'm hearing there. One is you have this tremendous strategic discipline as an organization, but it's equally, if not more important, to apply that same discipline to your personal life as well. And the term hasn't come up, but I've heard you use the term in the past, this critical path discipline. What does success look like? What are the component steps that I need to undertake to get to that place of success? And that discipline has applications both corporately and personally as well. And another thing that I'm hearing there is, in your role as a CEO, I mean, I know you personally, and I know you're a deeply empathetic person. So you end up wearing the burden of not just your role, but you end up wearing this burden of your team almost. And it's not just enough to care about the success of your team from a business standpoint, but it's important to care about your team from a personal well-being standpoint. And you touched on that as well.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, there's some things you said earlier, like, of course, as a leader, you have to be focused on results, and you have to be highly disciplined, and you have to take that approach to your personal life as well as your professional life, and figure out what that kind of critical formula is for success for yourself. I think, again, reflecting on the past 6 to 9 months, all of our regular routines have been challenged, and we've had to find new ways to find strength within and be resilient and do things that allow us to be successful personally and professionally. And a part of leadership is that caring personally for members of your team. And if you don't have the ability in that troubled water to give direction readily and know that your team's going to hear you and follow you and not question you. And it's it's an important thing. I mean, the time that we spend as leaders knowing, learning about our team members' families, about what them and their spouse love to do on the weekends, and where their passions are, and what activities their kids are in, and when their birthdays are, or what family events or times of year matter to them, or how their Christmas holidays are, whatever it is. There's there's a whole different ways to look at it, but at the end of the day, you need to be that coffee worthy leader, and you always need to be that coffee worthy leader, and you need to be prepared that you could walk into your office, or walk into a Zoom meeting these days, and you might need to take 15 minutes or 20 minutes or an hour to just check in on how people are, because that's an investment that you're making, not only in your relationship with them, but ultimately in the business and the culture and and put you in a position to achieve the results that you want to achieve, because your people know that you care about what's going on in their worlds, and that's important to you.
Coffee worthy leader. I've never heard it put so concisely like that. I mean, it's, I think we've all had experiences with coaches or advisors where, one conversation will be focused on business and results and what needs to happen. But there are times when we need to talk about stuff that matters in addition to that, right? And we need to focus on the personal to enable the success on the business.
Yeah, and just coupled with that, I would say when something's not working in your business, when you're out of alignment with one of your team members, and even if it's not one of your direct reports, perhaps it's a middle management or a frontline worker, it doesn't matter. Give yourself permission to go and have a conversation with that individual and talk about literally anything but work. In fact, don't give yourself permission, force yourself to do that.
Yeah.
And resist every urge, no matter what's on the plate, how important it is, because it will pay off. It will.
Yeah. You need to have that faith and that belief that it'll pay off. Absolutely. Let's change gears quickly. I'm hesitant to run over time here. In the context of this home building space in Alberta that you guys operate in, for the benefit of all business leaders, but also people who work in that space, what's going on in the home building industry that we should be cognizant of?
Well, I think, for starters, one of the things that's very interesting right now is everyone's spending so much more time at home. And so people are learning quite quickly what is working for them, what's not working for them in existing homes. And with a limited ability to do other things like travel, vacation, entertainment, there is a movement right now to improve lives through bettering the home that you're in, or making a move to a new home that better suits your family and your lifestyle. And so we believe in the home building space, in our philosophy is we believe that every decision to buy a new home ultimately starts with a motivation to move driven by dissatisfaction of your current living circumstances. We don't believe that any purchase decision is made based on something that's, if you think about going to buy a new car, generally don't buy a new car unless something's wrong with the old car first, something that isn't working for you. And so what's really unique in our space right now is that our customers and customers, I think, of most home building companies are accelerating what their knowledge of what isn't working for them in their living circumstances right now. And that's resulting in increased opportunity for us to help people buy new homes.
I love it. Okay, a couple of things I want to touch on there. So this goes back to a conversation that I was having with a colleague back in May, June, sometime around there, and we were talking about COVID, and there was nothing really else to talk about. And he made an interesting observation, which has always stuck with me. And he said, as much as people would like to believe that this pandemic is contributing to a market slowdown, and to a degree it is, what it's really doing is actually accelerating the market's transition to where it's always been going, except that journey has now been accelerated. And I think that's what you're saying now. Like, we're starting to learn in the home building industry specifically some tough lessons. It's trial by fire a little bit. But what I'm also hearing is it's important to have and maintain, not just for yourself, but within your team, this deeper cause and deeper purpose. You're not just building homes. What you're actually doing is improving people's lives and instilling that purpose and drive within the organization is going to contribute to just that, just in improving people's lives.
For sure. And I tend to start with the customer right away and see where that opportunity is, and hence why I think it's an incredible time to be in our business, and that there is a lot of opportunity. But the other side of that, in terms of accelerating the market to where it needs to be, is something that you raised. Is we've been a business that has operated a certain set of ways based on a certain set of principles that have just kind of always been done that way, at least in the Edmonton space. And what it's allowing us to do is to not have to operate based on historical norms for our industry. And so, the number of people that are buying homes now without actually physically seeing a product is it's staggering. And some that haven't adopted that philosophy yet don't believe it and don't believe it's possible. But from our standpoint, we're doing just as much business with just as many great customers as we were a year ago, and we're doing it with less physical sales centers or show homes for them to go in, and that we're running regular hours on. Everything's more catered to what that individual actually needs, and it allows us to focus on the potential client that knows what they want, knows who they want to buy with, or has narrowed, at least has eliminated it down to a small group of builders that they want to work with, and we're able to cater more to their needs rather than operating the way the industry's always done it and trying to force our customers to fit that mold. Customers have changed; they don't think that way anymore.
There's a little gem that you snuck in there, and I don't want to lose it. What I took from that was this principled approach to running the business. What we do might change. How we do it, how we approach the business is likely going to change over the years. But what we can't afford to jeopardize or to lose are these closely held principles and values that we have. And those are really going to instruct how we operate going forward, not just this year or next year, but 20 years, 30 years down the road.
For sure. And I mean, you think we've changed a lot about how our business is actually operating, how we sell homes, how we assemble homes, how our head office operates. All of those things changed on a dime as a function of necessity, but probably also accelerated something that was going to happen anyways. But it didn't change our vision. It didn't change our true north. And the teams and the businesses that I believe will have succeeded, regardless of what sector they're in, are the ones that were profoundly clear on what their true north was, and not just their CEO, not just their owner, not just their leadership team, but that true north had been cascaded down through the organization over time. Everyone knows what it is, whether you run behind a company purpose or a company vision, or you have a vision and a mission. To a certain extent, they all largely represent the same thing. This true north where everyone turns to and knows that this is where we're going. This is who we want to become. This is who we are. This is who we exist to serve. And if everyone knows that, it doesn't really matter how big the market is, because at the end of the day, the market is every interaction between one seller and one customer, one home builder, one home buyer. And that's the interaction that you need to get right. And that interaction needs to be aligned with what the true north is of your business. And if everyone's pulling the same direction, you're going to be okay. And I would suggest that your organizational values fall right in line with that. If you know that they're your values, and your team know that they're your values, and those are lines in the sand you're not going to cross, you're going to be okay. Your strategy will be fluid. There's no doubt your strategic plan that you wrote in December 2019 or March 1st, 2020 was still going to work on April 1st, 2020. And that's fluid, and that's got to go by the wayside for sure. But that doesn't mean that who you are and who you exist to serve is going to change. And if you were aligned on that in the first place, you're going to be okay.
Love it. Steve, let's put a big bow on this conversation here. I mean, and I'm looking at my clock here. I think we're about the 18-minute, 19-minute mark. In that time, we've talked about leadership, resiliency, critical path, leading through empathy, principled and valued approach, cascading strategy, considering operations with the end customer in mind. Not a bad not a bad conversation for 20 minutes here. What advice would you give to the leaders in similar positions to yours?
Um, that's a great question. Gosh, I guess if there was anything that I hadn't said already, I would say don't lose optimism, because without optimism, you don't have anything. It's not gonna make things happen, but it's going to enable things to happen, enable your team to allow things to happen. Second thing I would offer would be inquisitive, be deeply inquisitive, and especially in an environment of stress, force yourself to ask tough questions. Doesn't mean you need to accept the answers, but force yourself to ask questions. The second thing is don't set strategy, or the third thing I should say is don't set strategy on your own. Strategy should come from within and come from the people that are seeing and feeling and touching what's going on, and they need to be a part of the process in establishing strategy. And firms like yours, Jordan, are the ones that help organizations to extract the correct strategic approach for the for whatever they're up against in their market conditions, in changes that are happening in their business or in their line, or whatever it is. um, Great strategy has to emerge so that you can have a series of actions in pursuit of that vision. As the old proverb says, vision without action is a dream, action without vision is a nightmare. Well, if you got the vision, you're on the right track, but you do need to extract a strategy to put tangible and measurable goals, critical path thinking, et cetera, around that vision. And that's what strategy is: a series of actions in pursuit of a result, or ultimately your vision.
Love it. Okay, so what I'm hearing there, optimism, this deep rooted belief that things will work out in the end. Sometimes easier said than done. Looking back on the last 12 months, a lot of people's optimism has been put to the test, but for that very reason, it's important to maintain that belief. Inquisitiveness, you got to have the courage to ask tough questions, not even of your team or not just of your team, but maybe some tough questions to yourself as well. And then the last piece is I didn't hear the word directly, but reading between the lines, have a little bit of humility and recognize that you can't actually go through this journey on your own. You can't actually set strategy, create strategy, execute strategy on your own. It requires the alignment and the engagement of the people around you, and ultimately, that's what will enable the success of yourself personally, of your team personally, and of your organization.
You got it, man. I guess we can come back to that ship for one last second. And the team around you, your team may be wondering if they're ever going to get through that storm, but as the CEO, it is your obligation to know that you're going to make it wherever you're headed, and never for a moment doubt that that is going to happen and that you will get your team there.